Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for this week's live Q&A and news video. Thank you all so much for joining tonight's stream. Looking forward to discussing all things Star Wars with you guys tonight. We have a couple big topics to discuss. Yesterday, if you didn't catch it, we posted a reaction video for Andor Season 2 second trailer. So check out that video. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that second trailer here as well as the poster that they dropped, the horizontal kind of wallpaper-esque poster that they dropped. Pretty cool there. And then we have information on the Mandalorian and Grogu. It's the cheapest Disney Star Wars movie so far. We're going to talk about that and what it could mean for the future of Star Wars on the big screen. And then we're going to talk about finally our last big topic tonight. Doctor Aphra officially now confirmed to get a new series for the New Republic era. We have our Star Wars mainline starting here in a few months, and that's going to kick off the New Republic era of Star Wars comics. Obviously, we've had Darth Vader going along with it. There's not going to be a Darth Vader comic because he dies after the New Republic era starts. So it'll be interesting to see what other things they fit around that main line throughout the New Republic era and when exactly after Return of the Jedi it takes place. So we're looking forward to talking about all of that here today. Of course, as always, this is a Q&A. Ask us anything. So make sure you fire your questions into the chat. We love interacting with you guys, and that is the basis of these shows, is our interaction. So once we get through our topics, we will mostly be powered by your guys' discussion in the chat. So make sure you keep sending in your questions, your comments, theories, anything you'd like to discuss in the chat. And as always, this is Ask Us Anything, so it doesn't have to be Star Wars related. It can be anything you want. If you have questions about any Marvel, DC, movies, whatever you'd like to discuss in the worlds of pop culture, send it in to the chat. We're happy to discuss it with you all. All right, so let's get started on our main topic today, which, of course, as we continue to get closer and closer to Andor, we're now about a month away from Andor officially starting. We got a new trailer for Andor Season 2. This was our second full trailer, our first official trailer, not teaser. We've had the featurettes, we've had some TV spots, we've had a bunch of other things. And in that same vein, this trailer didn't show us a whole lot of new stuff, but it did, I think, its job, which was, hey, everybody, we sent you that fun trailer about a month ago. That was cool. Let's try to get more people on board. But this trailer is the vibe of Andor Season 1. This is the vibe of what people come to expect from this show. And we're going to show you that the vibe hasn't changed. It's still Andor, and it's still at its core a very dark, serious, grounded show. And it's going to be about the early rebellion. So I think it accomplished all of those things. I don't think it got me any more excited for the show than I already was. I'm very excited because Season 1 was so great. They didn't really need to market it to me, but I think it will help continue to get more and more people who are interested in Andor, or maybe only got a couple episodes through Season 1 or haven't yet checked it out. Hopefully it gets them excited to get back on board the Andor train. But Sanak, I did most of the reaction yesterday. You sent me in your quick thoughts, but what were your thoughts overall, a little more expanded, I guess, today on the Andor Season 2 latest trailer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously is a pretty solid trailer. It's not sent anything special, like you said. It's not really trying to be. It feels more like here is more hype to build off of. A couple little new shots, some more looks at Krennic. Okay, everyone is traumatized, struggling. Ah, yes, the classic aneurysms in full flight. Yeah, so yeah, that was nice. I think just kinda how season 1 marketing was kinda around Luthen's ship with its double laser spinning and, like, how that was kinda put in everything, like promos, trailers, TV spots, right? This now feels like the TIE Avenger is kinda taking that spotlight, and it feels like there's definitely more of an emphasis on making it, like, be big, right? Obviously, if you played, like, Dark Forces and everything back in the day, you're more kinda hyped around anything Imperial, and this is definitely something very much stemming from those late 90s EU games. And yeah, I think people are super excited to see that, and every shot that we get of it seems like they're getting more and more and more going on there. So um I'm excited. I don't know, like, just how much this is going to be like a ship that he has possession of for more than just like a breakaway scene. But I'm kind of hoping that there's a way like that the rebellion maybe uses it to like learn new strategies for their X-wings, or maybe they are now canonically kind of changing how the technology of the ties, which weren't necessarily superior, but at least when speed department was definitely a step ahead of anything that the rebellion had before A-wings came about. Maybe they're trying to tie it into like what exactly is so special about these engines in this one, or like what's so experimental about it that we can build up on this. What can we like keep doing here to take the edge off that the empire is trying to regain here. Obviously, the defender program is in play until like Rebel season 4 or so. So maybe they're taking elements of that, kind of putting in an Avenger. Maybe this is like an all-in-one. Maybe this was what the TIE Advanced X1 was supposed to be, but then, sorry, Vader, we couldn't deliver it. Like, I'm very curious what they're really trying to do with the origin here, because I don't expect them to keep it the same as the game version. And the more and more shots we see of it, the more it seems like they're emphasizing, like, we're going to do something all new. It's going to be big, and it's going to be exciting for everybody to kind of check out, new and old fans, right? So, just like how E-wings were kinda, like, slightly modified for Ahsoka and got to have, like, a couple of nice cool shots, I think we're gonna get that with the Avenger, but I do expect it to have, like, some serious plot elements and stuff like that to really come into full gear here, so, yeah, very excited about that. I know you were talking about the Gorman massacres, kinda what you're thinking is gonna be where we see Bix and Brasso and everyone. I really just kinda wanted to be Dantooine. I'd like to see Dantooine get its live action debut, and I think it is a nice thing to, like, build off as many New Hope elements as there are. It should be almost like they set the foundation, obviously, with Rogue One, but what other things were kinda, like, being worked around by the rebellion that kinda all coalesced into this plot that A New Hope builds off of, like, that these heroes that we get to meet for the first time really in the original film then are propelled by. Like, it's already incredible what they achieve, but also in some ways it's like, yeah, it is like a fairy tale. It is a space fantasy. Like, could they have really just done this in a matter of like days? Not really. And I like that Andor is adding some of the practicality. Like, there are things already in play, things that are abandoned, things that all kind of lined up. So I would like it to be that. And I think that's a good place for Bix's story to kind of verve into after playing more of a foil for Cassian when she's clearly not on just that planet. So is it the start? Is it the finish? I know you're saying maybe the Gorman Massacre is like a big part of like the second half of the season. Maybe covers two arcs or like builds off in the first one and then blows up in the second. I'm not sure yet. I know they did mention it's going to be featured over like 5 episodes or so. So I'm assuming that we're gonna at least get a taste of it in one, but then it's gonna be the central cog for like that maybe that final arc or something. But yeah, I mean, very excited. General audience trailer at the end of the day, nothing too special for the diehards. Definitely not something that's like out there like that revolutionary music that we got in the first one. But they are teasing some elements there that I'm pretty surprised how much more of a role they're playing, like the Avenger. And then, Krennic just eats Ben Mendelsohn just eats up the scene. Like, anytime I get a chance to see a movie with him, you can even put him in that Marvel film, right? Like Captain Marvel, and where he's not really playing a human him, right? But man, he's just so fun. He's just like I never watched past season 1, or maybe a couple episodes season 2 of Bloodline on Netflix, but man, he was fantastic. That's my first real introduction to him. And yeah, I mean, I more of him is better. And the more we get shots of him, especially where he's not necessarily wearing the same uniform at every single one or like some sort of modification of it. I do wonder just how much are we going to get before all the events leading up to Rogue One. Obviously, with the Death Star shot, yeah, that's going to be pretty important. But what if we are kind of going to start him off in maybe the second arc where he's dealing with Dedra more, or he's kind of working with? I know there's the whole issue that some people have with like ISB versus his kind of like unit that they kind of work hand in hand, but they're not really supposed to be wholly connected. There's a lot of like intrigue there for me to like to see like if they're going to delineate that a little bit more clearly, or they're going to try to do something else with it all entirely. So very excited. Like I said before, I do absolutely enjoy Gilroy just being so on top of canon compared to, like, so many other creators that we've had. Like, of all people, he really does appreciate that, and the interviews that he's been saying, like, "This is the most important thing I've done in my career," and all that, I'm like, I'm glad that he gets that. I'm glad that he gets that. Like, as wonderful as a filmmaker he is, and he's definitely had films and works that led him to this point. It's a Star Wars franchise, all right? And this is now gonna be something that is gonna not just continue to be Emmy nominated, but this is how you're gonna finish it, end it right, end it with a big bang. You can't just treat season 1 of Andor as, like, fool's gold, like, things all kinda just worked out there, right? So, yeah, just super excited. I wanna see where we go from here.
Yeah, there's so many things to look forward to with this show, obviously, but I do think we'll see in that first week how they decide to structure the show. The structure and the way they're deciding to drop these episodes will be one of the big things around how we see all the clips in the trailers play out, right?
Yeah,
Because is the show going to be more about Cassian and Mon Mothma, maybe some Saw Gerrera, maybe some Luthen, where it's character focused, big moments for them, truly defining moments for them. And then the backdrop is the Star Wars history, right? The Gorman Massacre, the stuff that we see in Rebels, up to Rogue One, the building of the Death Star, all that. Or with season two, and this can kind of tie in the poster that they dropped as well, the focus on the ensemble, the cast, like you're mentioning, Krennic having so much screen time in this trailer, the promotion of the Rogue One stuff. What is the direction of season two? Is it a Death Star, like, foreshadowing, forewarning season? Is the whole thing built around the coming doom that the Empire continues to present, or is it built around specific character arcs? Because I think both can happen, but both present very different types of shows, right? So if this trailer to me more so than the first one, especially even other marketing that we've seen, really went in on Death Star, the Rogue One tie-ins, right? And if it's going that direction, I don't think one direction or the other is better or worse until we see the show. I'm not going to have an opinion on that, but if that's the direction we go, then I would expect each arc, even if it jumps in time, to have more connection, more through line, more than just a tonal connection. Because
right.
before I was feeling like, okay, if we're focusing on the characters or focusing on Cassian, if we're focusing on whatever happens to Luthen, if we're focusing on Mon Mothma, then tonally we'll have a through line, tonally we'll have connections, tonally we'll have a build up, but we might not see it in the plot because it might just be an overview of so many things, because these 5 years building up to A New Hope have been covered to death by Disney, and they were covered a lot in Legends. Like, it was the part of the dark time that was heavily covered in Legends, where Disney's covered the dark times more than Legends did, but both have really covered the 5 years or so building up to A New Hope. So is this going to just continue to show us different perspectives, or is it going to be a broader scope, more centrally focused on character? I think it'll be interesting to see which direction they choose. We'll know within the first arc, the first week, which one they're going to choose. But it's exciting either way. I think it'll make for great television. This poster looks really, really cool, and I mean, pairing Krennic and Cassian back to back too does kind of indicate that Krennic is going to be a much bigger character than maybe we initially imagined. Let's talk about our second story today, which is going to be the $166 million production budget of The Mandalorian and Grogu. So Disney's been in the headlines a lot lately for their production budgets. It's been one of the big things that Disney has tried to do as they move into their new direction under Iger, mostly starting last year, but over the course of the next few years, is keep their production budgets lower. You were seeing bomb after bomb in 2023, especially with the insane production budgets around stuff like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, with insane production budgets around what was the other big bomb they had that year? The a movie I've completely forgot what it's called.
Not
Their
Wish,
animated
is
movie,
it? Is it
Wish.
Wish? Yeah.
Wish was terrible. They had a huge production budget around that. So now we're getting an under $200 million production budget around The Mandalorian and Grogu. It is the cheapest movie they've made in the Disney era for Star Wars, which is not too surprising considering this is a show that was revolutionary for the fact that it had such high visual effects budget or such a high quality visual effects team with a lower budget because of the fact they created the volume and were able to do so many things in camera. They didn't have to go back and do as many touch ups with VFX later. So that's not a surprise. We had heard they shot a lot of this on the volume. We had heard that, it was going to still be the Mandalorian experience that we've all come to expect. And so I'm not shocked at the number. I am happy that it's, an affordable number to the point where like this movie doesn't need to make unreal money to be profitable. This could make Solo a Star Wars story money and be profitable. And I think that's what they've set themselves up for with this is and at least, we talk about the plan that Disney needs to have for Star Wars and what they're planning to do in the future. I think a production budget like this shows you that they're in on the Mandalorian. They are committed to it because if this flops or if this barely makes back its money, they could still go for a second one and just hope that positive word of mouth if it's good, or hope that strong critic reviews, or hope that people just see it and fall in love with it later can build momentum towards a sequel. But if this was a $300 million budget movie, if this was like Snow White, which is flopping right now, but if this was 300 million, 250 million, you can't leave room for a possible sequel. You can't get started on a possible sequel until you know this is a hit. With 166 million, you can get started on a sequel, and basically, unless this is an absolute disaster, this will make its money back at the very least. And I think they've set themselves up to make, four or $500 million and be fairly happy with it and hope that the second one, third one, fourth one can continue to climb and
Mhm.
get them better and better returns on the Mandalorian and Grogu. But you hear the budget of Mandalorian and Grogu, Sanak. What are your thoughts on that reported story?
Not really surprised and pretty happy, honestly. Uh, like, let's be honest. Like, when we started this whole Disney era of Star Wars, it was awesome. Okay, we got the sequel trilogy coming out, and then you're telling me in between these films, we'll have spin-off films. Like, it was too good to be true. But with how great Rogue One was, you're like, hell, maybe they do got it right. The nice thing about Rogue One is that it's an idea that's just kind of there to fill like a plot hole in A New Hope, right? Like it's not necessary, but a pretty great film came out of it, and then obviously the very fantastic show leading into it of Andor came out. So yeah, I mean, I think after 2016 coming into 2017, of course we were all super hyped, right? Like this is gonna be the way Star Wars should be. Like it's gonna be dominant in the way that the MCU is. But the thing about the MCU is it's like one linear story. Everyone's kind of got that little pockets in the universe, but they like build into a big like one major event. Star Wars doesn't necessarily have to have that, right? And every Star Wars film should almost feel like an event in of itself, even if it's not big to the grand consequences of the galaxy, right? I can watch a Marvel movie and know, like, yeah, it's gonna be pretty segmented off, might never be referenced, mostly there for character development. That's not really how Star Wars films are supposed to be, right? They're supposed to feel special. And yeah, I mean, 2015, 2016 back to back felt pretty freaking special. And if you didn't love The Last Jedi, right? That still felt pretty special. Then we come into this solo situation. It's being reshot basically all over again, 2 point something times the budget or something. And it's just like, ah, man, like, what are you doing? And then 2019, Iger stepping down. Okay, the volume is here. We got Mandalorian Grogu becomes a huge hit, right? And you're like, oh yeah, let's just do everything on there. Well, that's tough too, because at the end of the day, like we've run into the same thing where history has repeated itself. Where in the '60s, everyone's like, "Oh man, TV's about to take over." It's not. You can do whatever you want. You can keep your budget smaller. You can do some cool visual tricks. It's not the same thing. A movie is a movie, right? And I think seeing all these movie scripts, especially be stretched out over TV shows for Star Wars, and definitely two Marvels, to unfortunate history. They both done the same thing, and you're like, okay, well, I wanted to watch a TV show, right? I appreciate the medium. People have always been talking about recently, like, oh man, I miss when we used to have like 24 episodes every year. that was insane too, right? But what the Mandalorian Grogu achieved with that fidelity and its visuals, while still feeling like, oh yeah, you can kind of pump these out year after year, or at least every year and a half. Like, yeah, that felt like a pretty modern way of like kind of going back to like the 90s with all these different Star Trek shows coming out where they get to redress the set, film of an episode for one show like Voyager, go back to Star Trek The Next Generation, etc. Right? So this felt like, oh, this is a technology you can use again and again and again, make a bunch of different shows and all that. But it wasn't really used like that. I think that was the frustrating part. Like, they didn't film a Boba Fett show almost concurrently, like, to fill in the gap, or say, like, this is the back half of the year, or like the Ahsoka show. That could have been filmed a lot more closely with Mandalorian and Grogu, but that was never the point or the intention. Let's be honest, I think Disney was just shocked Mandalorian became that big of a show, and they're like, "Okay, what do we do with this?" And they didn't really have scripts for TV shows in the same way. Even if you find Mandalorian very simple and like playing with your toys as like a kid just brought to life, it is still very episodic. It is still designed to be watched as a TV show. You can't necessarily say the same thing for a lot of these other shows besides maybe Ahsoka, and even that is kind of a stretch that film at part. So hearing this budget, hearing that they're kind of going back to basics and leaning on historical successes like the Star Trek movies and films, where they had like the original generation cast do their films on redress the next generation sets, which were then like filming an episode the next day or something. It's smart. Like, this is how it should be done. Keep your budget, reuse all the sets that you do have. And again, the volume is a tool. It's not every single scene is shot in the volume. A lot are, but they still use green screen, all this and that. You're shrinking this potential season 4 down to 2-ish hours, right? You're keeping the budget low, but you're increasing the output to like hopefully have everything look at minimum, in my opinion, like the season 2, episode 1, John Favreau directed episode of The Mandalorian Grogu, which was such a highlight, especially when we're all stuck at home and you're like, are you kidding me? I can basically see movie theater Star Wars like with that IMAX resolution and framing. Like, yeah, it was awesome. So I'm very excited to how to see what they can do here. I'm glad the more we're hearing little plot details here and there, as super wrapped as it is, you're like, okay, they are definitely building off of where they left off in season 3, but they're trying to go for that season 1 and 2 vibe. Okay, they've kept the budget tight. This will be something that even if just the diehards come out to watch it, it can easily make 500. It won't be like affected by Avengers Doomsday and all these other big movies that it's kind of being sandwiched by. And it can leg out as needed as like in your counter program. Like, yeah, I'm not really looking for another superhero movie, but I heard Mandalorian Grogu's kind of back and I don't really need to know season 3. There you go, right? So I know Star Wars fans and Star Trek fans have historically had a rivalry. They're both incredible franchises and very different. But from a production standpoint, you should take what 90 Star Trek did so well. They had 3 shows running at a point and multiple movies being made. It and for all these low budgets. And while I do think we should still have Disney Plus shows and then these big tentpole films, there's absolutely a place to have these smaller kind of middle budget films that, don't necessarily have to be huge billion-dollar successes, but can progress or like conclude like a TV show or something, or can maybe just be like a little pocket universe. You're seeing it happen to anime right now where a lot of these big anime series, they're choosing to kind of finish their shows, like Demon Slayer is choosing to finish its run with 3 movies. And yeah, it'll be on TV eventually, it'll be cut for TV, but if you can do that way, why not? And the same thing's gonna happen here too. Mandalorian Grogu is gonna be awesome to see. It'll have some exclusivity, maybe a shorter window than a lot of these theatrical destined films are. Maybe it drops down to 45 days instead of like 60 to 90. But, you're making it so that everybody who wants to see it gets a chance. You're making sure that it doesn't, like, flop, and, yeah, you're building off of historical precedents. I think it's a great move, and you can stretch 166 million over 2 hours much more easily than 100 or 110 max over 8 episodes. There are definitely, even in season 3, Amando, even in Ahsoka season 1, you can see where it's being stretched out. When people make fun of the environments being gray and drab, it's like, yeah, well, sometimes you kind of have to just basically shoot on a lot. You kind of have to do like the Geonosis arena, basically. but without the 3-year turnaround in post-production that George Lucas would give himself and his team. So, yeah, I'm very happy to hear that. I think this is only gonna bode well for us, and I look forward to seeing this leg out, honestly. I do think it has a great chance to and be good counter programming, and if this is a success, and, they wanna do 2 seasons of Ahsoka and then do, like, an Ahsoka film and then make this like a quasi trilogy where you then lead into this supposed New Republic finale film, this Heir to the Empire film, I think that'd be awesome, and then if you're plugging in Thrawn in this one and then he shows up again in the next, like, you could have that almost Thanos, like, he's coming or he's doing little things here. Now all the heroes, all the villains are ready to fight each other in this final film. Like, I think it's pretty smart, and that allows Disney and Iger and everybody involved to really properly do the showrunners for shows to make sure that they are making scripts that are meant for episodic TV or at least serialized TV that meant to have arcs in between episodes. It's a shame that Disney Plus have been trying to like play this weird game of like let's basically stretch out movies. If you want to compete with the HBOs of the world when you have Hulu and everything being integrated, you've got to raise your Disney Plus originals up quality wise. And the best way to do that is to play the game that is TV shows, make TV shows. So I'm pretty excited for what this means. If this is a success, then whatever these kind of stretched out scripts are feeling like for Disney Plus shows, maybe they get to just be nice little mini event films, and then you can just still enjoy it. And it's gone in 2 months max, but it made 400. Budget was 100. Great. Everything's fine. Let's move on to the next TV show. That's how it should be. There's definitely a middle ground for this. Star Wars fans will show up if the story is good, and that's all that really matters.
With this too, they're restarting the Mandalorian universe. So, like you're saying, if you ever did an Ahsoka movie, now I don't think that's a good idea personally. I just think you need your TV properties to be your TV properties. You need your movie properties to be your movie properties. Mandalorian is a rare exception because it's one of the few things on Star Wars that's not main Skywalker saga that's been able to cross over into the pop culture zeitgeist to the point where everybody knows the Mandalorian and everybody knows Grogu. They might not know Grogu's name now totally, but they know Baby Yoda, right? So you know that just by having an iconic image, an iconic group of people, you are going to get butts and seats no matter what. I think Ahsoka still needs to prove some of that with this iteration of Ahsoka. Now, if you went back and you did like Clone Wars story with Ahsoka and Anakin and you did all that, people will come watch that, but I think Ahsoka still needs to wrap up a story there. Then you can consider bringing her a part of the movie universe outside of just cameos, or you could do what you did in season 2 and you can bring her maybe in the third Mandalorian movie and have her be a co-lead or a side character who shows up and helps them out. But I think they're rebuilding this universe from the ground up. They had the original idea, kind of fell flat on its face with season 3 and Boba Fett and some things starting to let down part of the universe. Ahsoka not as well received, or not as well viewed as they had hoped. So I think they're resetting, hoping to go in the theatrical direction. And I mean, you see, they give themselves plenty of room for error here. I'm just excited because I think Disney needs to have some commitment on their Star Wars projects. We can't keep doing like we got all the announcements in 2020, but none of them were committed, right? Like nobody said, here's your next show that's going to run 3 seasons or 4 seasons. Andor was the only one, and that was announced before that 2020 slate. That was a pre JPEG decision. That was all started by Iger. So with Star Wars, I would just like to see them commit to a direction, even if it ends up being terrible, even if it sucks. I would just rather them say, we have a plan. This is what we're going with. We're going to do 3 Mandalorian movies. We have a story for a trilogy. We have a story for a duology. I'd like to see them do that. So this type of budget to me makes me think that they have a plan to continue with this in the theaters. It's not just a gimmick. It's not just a one-off. Hopefully they continue to develop this world, develop the story, and give us the exciting conclusion that we were promised, even if it's like 10 years after they initially said it would come out. And we do have some comments about this in the chat. Turkish says probably the volume is being put to use. Yeah, they're definitely using the volume for this show or this film. And then also says, "Are you guys talking about the one article that claims there's interest for a second season of Acolyte?" We weren't planning on talking about that, but we can talk about that a little later when we're doing the Q&A section. Then says, "I just hope the movie isn't just one mission where they rescue someone followed by a side quest like most Mandalorian episodes, especially since the series isn't particularly plot heavy." Well, I think you are going to see some type of mix of that, but you know, luckily for an episodic type TV show, that translates better into film because it's shorter episodes in a shorter format. So, film, you could do an hour and a half to 2 hour movie, make it all about one thing, and you don't have to come up with a new story beat. It can all be one long story beat. It could be an hour and a half. Sometimes you have an hour and 10-minute episodes in some shows. Basically, can just be slightly longer version of that. I mean, you don't get that in Star Wars, really, unfortunately, but it's
Right.
the same concept. And John Favreau, the reason I have a lot of faith in this is John Favreau has always been a movie guy. Mandalorian was the first show he did. It was, not necessarily his wheelhouse. And now he's returning to his wheelhouse. He's returning to the thing he's been incredibly successful at. Like, if you look at his filmography, he has a strong filmography, not just with starting the MCU, not just with making Disney lots of money with Jungle Book and Lion King, but he does have a really strong filmography across the board. He's made some fun movies. He directed Elf, so this guy knows how to make a movie. And that's the thing that gives me confidence because I saw Moana 2. I saw how much of how disjointed it was taking a TV show and turning it into a movie. And that movie just felt like you could tell when the episodes were supposed to end and the next episode was supposed to start. If you could feel the cliffhangers built into the movie when there shouldn't be cliffhangers, right? So that makes, like, if this was Mandalorian season 4 turned into a movie, that makes me nervous, but the only reason I'm not as nervous as I would be with other projects is the fact that Jon Favreau is the one working on this. Now, he's not infallible. He could definitely screw this up. They could definitely screw this up. But I think if we have our expectations tempered, I mean, Star Wars has given us nothing to expect super high product recently. If we have our temptation or our expectations tempered, expect like a 6 or 7 out of 10 movie. I think that's a good enough start for the future here. It's sad that we've come to that point, but at this point, I'm hoping for a 7 out of 10 movie. I'm hoping for it to be better than season 3 of Mandalorian, but close to as good as season 1. And for me, I'll be fairly happy with that. Now, when you get to the second movie, you expect a much greater product. But with this first one, I just want it to be good. I want them to find their footing and to get their plan going, because that's the main part of this is just, let's see Star Wars back in theaters again, and then let's see them figure out how to do Star Wars in theaters again without the Skywalker saga.
I mean, that's always been the challenge, right? Like, how do we make it so that we don't have the Skywalkers tied to every freaking thing? That's something that EU can never get away from. Every generation of Skywalkers involved, right? All the way to Star Wars Legacy. You have another Skywalker leading the way. And yes, that's all wonderful. But then when we got to later EU, where we had so much of pre the Phantom Menace storytelling be fleshed out, you had plenty of incredible characters that became icons in their own right. A lot of the Tales of the Jedi characters, I'm always gonna give a shout out to like Exar Kun and Yula Qualdroma, but really the KOTOR characters, right? Like there's such great evidence that you don't need to be a Skywalker to have almost a Skywalker-esque quality, right? Obviously, I would like for things to be differentiated, that's kinda how I want Skywalkers to still be special, and whatever other groups or other people or tribes or whatever kinda come up in different periods of Star Wars that are similar, they should still have some pretty big distinguishing features. That's something that I feel like is still a little missing in both EU and canon, but regardless, it's not a bad situation to be in, like, "Oh, okay, but we're trying to figure it out." It just it would've been a lot nicer if this was figured out 5, 6 years ago, right? Again, this is, like, the unfortunate burden of finding a breakout success in the Mandalorian Grogu, right? You're expecting this to be a cool show. Maybe you can get to keep this super standalone, have fun. Eventually, we're gonna get to Luke and Leia and do whatever, right? But sure, maybe a cameo from this character or supporting role. you don't expect him to become this superstar. Like, sure, Grogu became pretty big because there's not really many of Yoda's species, but it wasn't supposed to be this massive global phenomenon. There was hope for it, sure, but I don't think anybody was, like, expecting, like, this will change the direction of Star Wars. And the fact that they couldn't replicate it, it's like, "Oh, man, like, that's tough." Like, we couldn't do the MCU way of doing it? Well, yeah, you didn't really make TV shows again. You kinda made it these weird extended stories that you're forced to watch every single thing instead of, like, being able to be like, "Oh, I can kinda watch a recap of that as needed and come back to the Mandalorian story," kinda like how you can with, like, MCU and its prime. So, yeah, it's unfortunate. I think we're gonna get past it, but yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. I really hope that the question being like, "Oh, like, if we're just gonna have a quest, a fetch quest, or, like, The Rise of Skywalker, or are we gonna do the Mandalorian style of, like, here's a quest, but to be able to complete this quest, you have to do another quest." I don't know, I think we're gonna get a mix of it, to be fair, but I think what's gonna be nice about it is that the thing that's gonna, like, throw them off course from this maybe smaller-ish mission might end up, like, opening up the whole thing, like, pulling the curtain and revealing the Shadow Council and just how deeply entrenched they are into their plans already, right? I think that's maybe how we're gonna run into it because I know I'm sure, like, those AT-ATs are not necessarily that shot that we're gonna have in the proper movie. Star Wars films especially have always had alternate scenes and all that, but I do think there's a chance that when you show something like that, it's because you're trying to say, like, whatever we're running into is gonna be massive. It's not just a mission, it's, like, almost life or death. Like, this is gonna change the direction of everything. So, start with something familiar, and then they stumble into something that's way bigger than they realize, and that becomes a priority, right? That's kinda how I view it, and then that's where you can make the connective tissue between the shows and make the next steps and then bring in the cues for our original trilogy characters to kind of start leading into this almost heir to the empire style adaptation. So I'm not worried about it. Like Liam said, even if it is like that, like a Mandalorian episode, that makes a lot more sense over 2 hours with the budget. It'll actually play out a lot better instead of just feeling like, oh, every week, how small of like a little silly thing are they gonna do sometimes? Right. Now this time it'll be like, oh no, it's be big and even if it is a side mission. But truly, I do think they're gonna, like, open up the world with this thing that they stumble into.
And then Turkish said the final movie will have all the protagonists of the Mandalorian universe. It's supposed to, but we don't really know what the Filoni movie is anymore. And
Yeah,
that was announced like almost a year before, 8 months or so before they announced Mandalorian and Grogu. So things might have changed. I wouldn't expect the Filoni movie, if that's what you're still expecting to be the finale or the final movie of these Mandalorian stories. I wouldn't expect that anytime soon. I would expect it maybe at best like 5 years from now, but I think it's gonna be much longer, and it might not even be Filoni anymore. We will see. And then Critical Thinker said sounds kind of like the Clone Wars movie, to be honest. I think there's a big difference. One is the
uh,
Clone Wars movie was launching a TV show. Obviously, it's animated, but it was launching a TV show, and it was episodes of the TV show built for launching a TV show. This is trying to one of the biggest goals of the Mandalorian Grogu is trying to convince you that these characters and Star Wars is
yeah,
theatrical again. So I don't think there's much of a comparison where like the Clone Wars movie is on a budget. It was, financed by Lucas as all Star Wars movies were, but he didn't put that much money into it. I believe it was like less than a $10 million budget. So it was a low budget movie. This 166 million is not a small number, even if it's small for recent Disney budgets. And the fact that we are trying to start a new cinematic universe rather than a TV show, this is going to be something that they put a lot of their chips into the basket of this, or their eggs into the basket of this show or this film, because they need to succeed in order for people who don't have Star Wars on the brain anymore when it comes to television and film to give it a second chance. And that's their biggest goal, is tell you, hey, this is good. We make good Star Wars again. And Mandalorian was the last thing you guys fell in love with. It's here and it's theatrical now. And now you can fall in love with it again. on the big screen. But let's move to our final topic here, and then we'll get to the questions because we're far into tonight's stream already, just through the first two topics. And we'll talk about this one briefly because I know it doesn't necessarily concern everybody, but it is something exciting. If you've been following the last 10 years of Star Wars comics under Marvel, we do have a confirmation now of Doctor Aphra, Chaos Agent, a new ongoing comic book for Doctor Aphra that is set in the New Republic era, where she will once again team up with Luke Skywalker to hunt down a rare artifact. We are also going to see her run into some trouble with her electro tattoos. And of course, just kind of in classic Aphra fashion, I'm sure there'll be some really cool hijinks along the way. We got three covers, one main cover, as you can see in the thumbnail, and then two variants that were also dropped. I do really like the variant of her with the like in jail on the line or whatever it's called. Uh, that's a pretty cool cover. It is going to be written by, let's see, I lost her name, Cherish Chen, who wrote an Image comic called Radiant Red. I have not read that, so I have no real opinion on Cherish Chen or Radiant Red. Art is going to be from Gabriel Guzman, who has drawn Star Wars in the past, and I think has done a fabulous job with some of his work on Star Wars. So this is exciting. I haven't been the biggest Afra fan over the last few years. It's a fun book. I do think the novelty behind Afra is really cool. The idea of having a character that was birthed out of comics get her own series is really neat to me, and I'm glad it keeps going here. But she is kind of a gimmick character to me, and so even though I've enjoyed her stories, they're like, fun, relaxing reads, but they're not going to change the Star Wars universe, right? If you're looking for the next thing that defines the New Republic era, it's not going to be Dr. Aphra. Although having Luke in here is pretty cool. It does elevate it to maybe something that I check out day one instead of something I wait, a few months for the trade paperback. But overall, excited, glad this series is continuing, even if it's not one of my favorites, and looking forward to hearing how the first issues go and whether the quality is up to snuff with the previous two lines.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone looks at Gillen's run as like that's peak, right? Um, Peak for me was when she was in the Vader run, right? That's when she was introduced, and that's when she was hugely important to the plot. That's when she had all the Afra-isms be introduced. Everything else afterwards is like mining just how much of this kind of self-tortured soul or, constantly failing into her failings sort of character she can be. And if she's actually going to change or grow and make the right connections, try to improve herself, right? I do love the Gillen run. I think it gets a little repetitive by the end there. I'm not gonna lie, but I thought it was definitely a ride. Like it's a very bingeable series. So I think that's what made everyone go like, yeah, she can be like a big character for the comics, right? And then when we got around to, sorry,
Yeah, all
when
right.
we got into the second run here, right, it was like, like, was it really worth it this time? And it took a while. Don't don't get me wrong, I didn't love that first run, but then it started improving. Alyssa Wong, their series really started building off of what was already there, pre-existing in the Gillen run, and then introducing some of the best stuff that is always gonna be fresh with Afro, the archaeological stuff, and they started making that a lot more important to like connecting to EU lore, like the Tag family and all that. And I thought, okay, now we're starting to go on a run, and it ended quite strong. I was quite pleased with where we left off with it. Now, is a third series necessary for her? I don't know, but I'm hoping. I'm hoping that, she gets to do something new and different. I did always love her interactions with Luke because she kinda plays Luke so much. Like, it's like a joke half the time. Like, half the time he's like, "I'm a good person, Aphra," and she's like, "I know, that's exactly why I dragged you into this mess." And it's like, "Alright, cool, great." So, I'm very curious with how little we know about Luke in this era, especially post, redeeming his father and all that. What is he gonna do? Like, does he tell Aphra this? Aphra is probably the closest person that he knows to his father in some ways besides immediate connection. So yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty interesting. I'd like to see if she helps him uncover more Force stuff. I hope if there's something that, like, takes her on, like, a whole, like, series arc. I don't know if that we have enough of an arc for her to, like, go unless you're completely trying to reinvent her character. I never thought the Alyssa Wong run was trying to totally reinvent her character, but more finally push her to embrace some of her goodness, right? But if we're gonna reinvent her, I'm assuming we're gonna have a backslide. So I'm very curious how much of that backslide is gonna be beneficial for the character, or how much of that is just more so we can throw Luke into the story more often, we can have him lead or co-lead, like, maybe the first 2 arcs before she finally does more things again here. And lastly, the one thing I'd say is the one nice thing I could probably take out of this is that if they start doing some sort of New Republic animated show, she's gonna be ready. She's primed. She's such a important character to have over 10 years, this much of a legacy in comics. There's not many EU only characters in comics that can say the same thing there. And if she I think she's got a chance to, pop out somewhere. I know people want her in live action. I think it's a bit of a gamble. I know what we saw with Fernestra from High Republic to Acolyte. I do also think again Lucasfilm Story Group kind of just gave that character away to Leslie. I think this is a situation though that you should be a little smarter. Do like a sort of chrysanthemum role where they can kind of pop up and you don't need to know anything about their character. But with how complex Aphra is, maybe jump her into animation, set the stage for everyone there, and then do live action.
Well, I mean, it would be awesome to see her show up in live action. And Turkish was asking what the character's like because they didn't read Darth Vader. It's Indiana Jones Star Wars, basically. She's an archaeologist. She hunts down rare treasures, but instead of it being fully into Indiana Jones, she's kind of got the moral compass of like a Hondo, maybe a little bit nicer than Hondo, where she, doesn't really have much of a good guy streak, very much so an anti-hero. It's like an anti-hero Indiana Jones in space is really what this character is like. And because of that, I think she is fun. I agree. Sanak, like my favorite versions of Aphra have been as a supporting character in stuff like Darth Vader. But that first run, probably because it was Gillen who created her in the Darth Vader run and knew how to write her really well in the Darth Vader run. I thought he did a great job in his first half of that run, and then you had Cy Spurrier take it on, and there were some good arcs as well. But I think overall the character is more gimmicky. That's where it's like hard to really get too invested for me in her stories, but I do have fun. It's like a comfort read, like if you're reading your main Star Wars line, you can have the comfort read that is Dr. Aphra. I'm a little surprised she's still going, honestly, this long, but it is very cool. I mean, I think I always am happy when there are new characters being created in the literary side of Star Wars, and then they continue to grow and develop and actually get attention. And we haven't seen that very much with canon. And so it is still nice that a character that was created in 2015, right when Star Wars canon comics were starting, is still going 10 years later. I think that's pretty cool. Hopefully this series is good and something that is a worthwhile addition to the New Republic era. But those are our main topics all wrapped up. Excuse me for today. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. We're going to now get to the chats. And so, just a friendly reminder, we go for close to 2 hours on the show. We don't always get to every chat. So, if you'd like to support the channel, you'd like to make sure your chat gets bumped up to the top, send in a super chat. Helps us out a lot. And we will feature your chat first. You can also join our Patreon or YouTube membership programs. If you're of a certain tier, you will get chat priority as well for each stream. So we're going to run through first come, first serve here, starting with the top. That is from Batusai the Manslayer. Welcome back, Batusai. It's been a while since we've seen you. Says, hey guys, nice to see you. Have you seen those Star Wars moments done by AI? Dooku and Palpatine dissolving the Senate, Qui-Gon speaking with Yoda and The Empire Strikes Back. I think they're absolutely amazing. Totally shocked me how good the reproduction of the original voices are, which is a grand compliment to achieve with a voice like the one Sir Christopher Lee had. Visually, it's getting better fast. I'm convinced that this is the way going forward for legacy characters in the case that they need to appear in a live action project. There was one between Ben Kenobi and Luke pre The Last Jedi, which was fantastic. Well, I have not seen him. I'll have to check it out. I'm not really, as a creative myself, not really pro anything that's too heavily based in AI for creative side. I never mind the use of AI or deep fake for a cameo, like I've said in the past. I don't mind the Luke appearances, don't mind Tarkin's role, even though he's much bigger than a cameo in Rogue One. But that was still an actor who they just put a deep fake face on before deep fake was really a thing. Anyway, I don't mind them doing that for small moments, but I don't think it's personally for me the way I would want them to go if they were actually developing these scenes. I'd much prefer an animated show. I'd much prefer a comic or a book. But if you were to do it in live action, I think recasting, unless it's a brief cameo moment or just an action scene or something like that, is the better way to go to get the true spirit of the characters. But it is, I'll have to check those out. They do sound pretty cool.
I'm not a fan of them. Like Liam said, as a creative, I really struggle with AI. Um, I get it. Like, people live in this world now that, ChatGPT is used for everything, DeepSeek, everything. Like, artificial intelligence is progressing very rapidly. Generative AI is becoming a huge thing for everyone. Um, AI centers are almost replacing people in computer science, which is kind of funny to me because I thought that was going to be a degree that people would always tell me, like, "Oh, yeah, you film majors in college. What are you going to do, right? What are your job?" And now I'm like, well, not much better than you apparently, because now you can't find anything. So it's like, yeah, you have to be more well-rounded nowadays. You can't just do computer science anymore. So it's kinda funny to me seeing that nowadays. It's kinda sad, obviously, that it's becoming a lot harder of a job market for everybody. But, yeah, I've seen that channel. It's not that look, I appreciate people trying to take their ideas and conceptualize them and put them out. That's fine, right? Like, I don't really hate the idea of it, but I do not want that to become official Star Wars. Like, there's already AI being used in film. Like, people are de-aging using AI tools a lot faster than even just doing a full deepfake replacement. I mean, you can look a lot of Tom Cruise films. He's 60 something years old, and yet sometimes his skin looks really great. Like he looks like he's 20 years younger, right? Like they've been using these tools for years, just now that we have AI assisting it. And I think when you talk about voices, it's like, okay, I get what you're trying to say. You want to hear it in that original person's, but maybe use that as like an exercise, right? If it's like you saying like, oh, I wish that we could have had Ewan McGregor, but we'd always hear Alec Guinness's voice. No, that hello there from Guinness is iconic, sure, but the way McGregor says it became the meme, became the thing that everyone kind of greets each other with, right? And when you even look in the BTS documentaries, like they did incredible things with makeup, showing how they casted as close as possible, how he aged right into the role, right? Like you don't need AI for that. AI is also another thing that I really think people always discredit AI for or like don't really think about. It's such a tax on resources. It wastes so much energy. It burns through and pollutes heavily, right? It just it's something that can be used to fill gaps, but it shouldn't replace in my mind. Like for that voice thing that you're saying, right? So many people used to record, for example, their like their voicemail greeting, right? What if you leave the company? The company might use your voicemail greeting again and again and again for years. Now you can do it like text to speech. Just type it in, bam, there you go, right? And there's all these different voices. It's not necessarily one particular person. And even if it is one person, they sign that away to get some sort of, payment out of it, right? I think that's good there because you're filling in a gap where does it really make sense to hire somebody to do that for me? Or and then does it and it covers for, like, I don't really wanna have my voice be kinda used and, like, filtered around and then eventually be picked up on the internet and used for some sort of model, right? Like, it makes sense, like, in it to fill in the gaps where you need new voices, but you don't necessarily need a person hired to do that, or you don't wanna do it yourself, right? I think that's where it's great. I like the channel for what it's trying to, like, allow people to do, but I also can see that it's like something that people are thinking that you're just gonna replace that. We're gonna just replace things. We're just gonna be able to, like, have Darth Vader forever and ever and ever. if Star Wars is gonna move past these characters, be able to grow into the 21st century, it can't be dependent on all this stuff being rehashed again and again and again. That's a problem that we're having with current Star Wars. As much as I like a lot of current Star Wars, a lot of the Star Wars that we have now is like being inspired by older Star Wars. It's not being inspired by other mythical tales. It's not being inspired by pop culture. It's not being inspired by current events as much as it should be, right? And when you do that sort of stuff, naturally you get new actors, new stories, new characters where you don't need to just, try to double down on characters that have been, written and directed and shot again and again and again. So AI, yeah, I'm not really a fan of it. And the deepfake cameo is okay, but if we were to have like a Luke Skywalker interacting with an Ezra and Ahsoka, I do not want that to be anything more than just like to improve whatever practical things we can do where we can put an actor, give them the role of a lifetime and let them move forward with that role with grace. Yes, Solo failed as a film, but it failed on many levels. But if you look at Alden Ehrenreich and you see the deep fake that they do of Harrison Ford's face over him, people are suddenly shocked, like, "Whoa, maybe Alden was really good." Oh yeah, his mannerisms are one to one. Like that's what makes it work so well. He does it so well. But are we gonna say now, like, oh, like that's the end all be all, like it didn't work there? No, we should try it again. We've got proof before that it worked. We got proof with Ewan McGregor, right? I don't know why we can't keep doing that, right? So AI should be a tool to enhance, a tool to fill in gaps, a tool to like improve things that people who are actually being creative and building things out feel like, okay, this is just an assistance. It's not a replacement. And the more we buy into this idea that it can all be replaced, everything can be generated, the less original all the stuff we're gonna have, right? All these awesome AI things that you're seeing, maybe some cool videos and all that, they're technically also a lot of them also breaking copyright law. They're just taking, like, old books and all the whole plotline details, filtering that into, like, "Okay, this is how this character interacts. Bam, here you go. This is how it's visualized," right? That's not cool. That's not cool. That's someone who spent years of their life, spent days frustrated over their work, but then finally crafted something. You think that Timothy Zahn is gonna be happy that you're pulling everything that he's thought about Thrawn and put on pen and paper, and then now suddenly you have, like, all these AI Thrawn videos? Probably not. And he also knows that it's gonna be based off of his work because he's the basically the sole contributor to that. So yeah, maybe a little too much of a rant there, maybe a little negative, but I'm just not a fan of how AI is being progressively kind of pushed out there like, "Oh, yeah, we can just redo things that we've already done again and again and again." No, that you're losing in originality because there's nothing original about AI so far as it's been used in the creative fields.
Recasting, the only reason it doesn't sound right now is because we haven't done it yet, right? Like I made
Yeah,
this argument last week. If Alden would have been given 5 movies or something, or at this point now we're on 7 years since Solo Star Wars Story came out. If we had seen Alden in a movie and then a cameo in a show or a co-lead in the Lando movie a bunch of times, right? Ewan McGregor feels like Alec Guinness to a lot of us because we saw him 3 times. Then we saw him in the Obi-Wan show. We had
yeah,
20 years now to sit with it and sit with the fact that he's Obi-Wan. It always will feel weird until you have it the repetition of that character on screen being the character in spirit, right? Nobody will feel like Luke except Mark Hamill until you see another guy play Luke for 40 years, just like Mark Hamill did. Then it'll start feeling like Luke, right? Like that's kind of the thing is you have that initial hurdle. You have to get over it. Now, as a fan whose whole life I've had one Luke Skywalker, one Han Solo, or one Leia, right? It will be very difficult, but they could do it if they wanted to, and eventually people would accept it. You just have to keep going with it. You can't just try it once like Solo Star Wars Story. Again, like I said last week, it was the spin-off movie that nobody was asking for. Nobody when they said they were going to do character spin-offs, nobody was like, we need a Han Solo origin story, not with Harrison Ford. I think almost everybody was looking for an Obi-Wan movie in the vein of the Obi-Wan show that we got. We were looking for maybe a Qui-Gon movie, other actors where you could bring in the original actors, or we are looking for a new take or new concepts like a Rogue One, right? Nobody was looking for a Han Solo movie, but you did it anyways, and then you kind of gave up on it because of the poor marketing and all that. You just scrapped the idea, and it's kind of killed in general recasting Star Wars characters when it has been something we've done in the past with George Lucas, and I think it's something we can absolutely do again. It's just going to take time for audiences to start fully accepting that that person is this character. So the only way to do it is to keep going with it and not give up on it. We do have a super chat from Turkish. Thank you so much for supporting the show, Turkish, and for joining us these last few weeks to send in all your questions and your comments. It says, great job, guys. Any speculation on new Star Wars properties that could be announced at Star Wars Celebration? Well, that's a tough one. We did kind of speculate on it, I think, last week. But I do think they are going to focus at Celebration on the stuff they've already announced. I mean, we ran over the panel list, so I expect Mandalorian and Grogu and Andor to be dominating the the entire show, basically. Andor will be coming out like 3 days later from when the show ends. So that will be a big focus. Mandalorian and Grogu, I expect a trailer. But I do think they might announce what the future is of Star Wars on the big screen, because I think a lot of this stream or a lot of this celebration will be focused on Star Wars is a theatrical experience, and you guys need to come back and see what we're cooking up for you on the big screen. So whether that's information on Dawn of the Jedi, whether it's some more information on the Rey movie, I doubt the Rey movie makes any appearance whatsoever, and I doubt Filoni's movie makes any appearance whatsoever. But maybe, just maybe, we could have a little bit more info on what Sean Levy's movie is. Maybe we could have a little more info on the Lando movie if it's actually getting going. Maybe we could have some more info on what their plans are for the future of Mandalorian, post Mandalorian and Grogu. But I don't see too many new properties being announced unless it's in animation. And I think animation is the place where they could announce something fresh. Like I said before, I'm still rooting for a Dark Times centered show in the vein of Clone Wars, where you cover the entirety of that 20-year stretch. You focus on a bunch of different characters. You can bring in different stories. You can bring in legend stories if you wanted to. Like, you could throw in Force Unleashed and do a version of that. You can do Vader stories. You can do Clone Rebellion. You can do all those different things. We know they are actively working on an animated series. We haven't heard what it is yet. I think we could get the announcement for that animated series in this celebration. I think that's about it when it comes to new properties, because I think one of the big things Lucasfilm is trying to do is not give us too much information to set us up for disappointment, because right now they have under delivered on almost everything when they've announced new projects, especially when it comes to films. And I think their goal right now is to save face, start anew, start fresh in a new direction. And Mandalorian and Grogu is that thing. And Turkish also says, do you guys think the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi movie is actually happening? They said KOTOR would be adapted to canon, but then there's no news on that front as well. KOTOR has not officially been announced. It was just a rumor. So I would be shocked if we hear about KOTOR. Again, they don't usually lay on the massive announcements at these foreign celebrations. They save them a lot of times for US. So I'm not expecting anything as massive as KOTOR to get announced. But I think you could hear about Dawn of the Jedi, because from what we've heard, it's supposed to start shooting this year, but we've heard different, conflicting things from James Mangold versus his writing partner. I'm forgetting his name, who's co-writing the script with them, who was saying, oh, we might start shooting this year. And then James Mangold was in an interview promoting the Bob Dylan movie, and he was like, yeah, I mean, my Star Wars movie, I don't want to be tied down to too many things. Like, we'll see how it goes. And he was kind of acting like they have no real start or traction on it. So who knows what's happening with that? But I think you could get maybe a little bit more information on the direction, or maybe a release date announcement for Dawn of the Jedi. But I don't expect any real promotion of the movie at Celebration.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question here, Turkish. I really do think that being in Japan, they're gonna have to, like, lean into, like, Japanese mediums, right? Like, I think we're gonna get Path of the Lightsaber, get, like, a pretty big panel or big focus and maybe be like a spearhead, to a lot of this Last Jedi to the Rise of Skywalker buildup that seems to be happening in comics and everything, so I wouldn't be surprised if they announce another one, like another spin-off of something or yeah, another original manga. I think that'd be a pretty big bet there. Um, I really, really hope they just basically end off Celebration being like, "Oh, by the way, here's our, like, our last announcement. We're doing a Star Wars anime," right? And I think that'd be so exciting, right? And I think Tales of the Jedi, like the original Tales of the Jedi, is prime for something like that, where you can just flesh out all these things that happen after Dawn, but before KOTOR, right? And it can still be its own thing. You can make it very concretely a big gap. But yeah, that's just how I feel. Like or do something entirely new. I don't know if Ninth Jedi, as much as I love it, could necessarily be something to like be 300 years past Ray or something. I'm not so sure about that, but yeah, I think you can do some really incredible things. I think you can do really incredible things with anime and manga, and that could lead the way. Like Liam said, theatrical, theatrical, theatrical. You have to emphasize that as much as you can, and I think they will. I think they will. I think they're gonna really push scenes, if not promos, on this, celebration exclusive footage of like just how insane this film is gonna look like when you're in theaters. I wouldn't be surprised, especially with the news that, they're really pushing for as many 40X screenings as possible for Revenge of the Sith. And yes, they had a couple for Phantom Menace. They just really weren't marketed well. But with the push for 40X there and like the need to like, make people come back to theaters, especially when they're more satisfied with streaming shows or just original content creators and YouTube and Twitch, yeah, I mean, why not make this like a film that has the intention of almost being like a roller coaster, almost being like you're on a Galaxy's Edge ride for some people, right? I know maybe that's shocking to say as someone who has a film background, but if there's any Star Wars, property that is like ready to be like just an adventure that you can sit through and experience, it probably is Mandalorian and Grogu, right? Like they are some of the most physical, like stunt-defying characters that we currently have from, like, the new ones, right? So, I'd love to see something like that, like a big push for that, some sort of new technology. That's one thing that ILM had kind of missed on, at least from what we know, because they were so limited on what they're showing on BTS, but sequel trilogy didn't really have much new stuff. Mandalorian definitely did, and now what's the next step? If are you just shrinking the length of a season 4 and then putting on screen so you have better looking visuals, or are you taking another leap? I hope they really do emphasize that this is a theatrical experience any which way. Like, you're gonna watch it once for the movie, then you're gonna watch it again for, like, the ride or the roller coaster. I wouldn't mind something like that. So yeah, no, definitely excited, for whatever that comes out of there. I think Dawn of the Jedi will get some concept art or something or, maybe some casting, hopefully, but yeah, the Rey one, they if they do anything, I feel like it's gotta be, like, plot line. Like, what exactly is gonna be happening, and maybe, like, if they're still sticking with, like, the 2 younger co-leads, maybe they're introduced. That's the max I see out of that, unless they, like, do some, like, shots of them in their armor or, like, their clothing or something just to, like, show off, like, "You guys, like, it's happening. Like, we're just, like, ramping up now. We've finalized it." And the biggest thing they could honestly do besides that is to just emphasize, like, "Hey, we're satisfied with the script now. Bring in whoever's the current writer or maybe all the original writers, say, like, this is an incredible team. They're all gonna get credit for it. They made something together, which we think is gonna be awesome to see, and they've all had some input or something." So yeah, yeah. I'm excited. I am definitely excited. So whatever that means for these films as they're promoted, I don't know. But yeah, let Mandalorian and Grogu take center stage and then hopefully end off celebration with like, hey guys, we're getting ready to ramp up closer and closer to the 50th anniversary of A New Hope. Like, let's give you like the first taste of something, right? maybe say like, "Oh, 2026, we're gonna have so much promotion for that. This is gonna be like the big thing, setting up like a whole bunch of anniversary screenings for the 50th the year after or something." I think you have to really emphasize that we're really at that half century mark too. And I think that's like a nice way to just wrap it up. Like this is the final bow. This is what the next celebration is gonna really be emphasizing. Um, I'm gonna throw a bit of a Hail Mary out there, but maybe they come out finally with the despecialized editions officially of, you know, of everything. If the compromise is that you have to keep McClunky, but everything else is original effects for some people, I think I can live with that. I really could. If that's just the one scene affected and everything else can kind of go back for some collectors, great. It probably won't, but I'd like to see something like that just because if we're gonna start ramping up towards recasting these characters, let us all see them truly in the original films that they were.
I think that would be more a 2027 thing with the
Yeah.
50th. But yeah, as for an anime, I mean, it would be awesome if they announced it. I'd prefer an anime to be not just necessarily Ninth Jedi, but like something just completely out of the timeline, just off on its own, way in the future, way in the past. Just let it be an anime. Don't put the constraints of the Star Wars mythology around it because it's just won't it'll be very difficult, just like, when we talk about video games and you talk about a Cal Kestis or a Galen Merrick who have unbelievable power, and you're like, how do they fit into the hierarchy and story around Star Wars? I think setting things within the main Star Wars story, well, yes, more iconic and easier to sell, it makes it difficult for a lot of fans who are trying to keep all the lore together, especially when it could be something as bombastic as an anime. So if you want to go full anime with it, set it in the far future and just let them do their thing and just have lightsabers, have blasters, have spaceships, and let it be an anime. And I hope that's what they do if they do an anime. And as for Turkish's question about it, do we know if Sean Levy and Taika Waititi are still on track to make their movies? They're both still hired by Lucasfilm.
Patty
The Taika
Jenkins.
Waititi one sounds like it probably won't happen, and if it does, Taika, just for clarity for everybody, Ryan Johnson's still on board to direct his trilogy of movies that was announced back in 2017 before The Last Jedi came out, right? So they haven't officially canceled like anything that they're making, or really except the Acolyte. The Acolyte and Rangers of the New Republic were like the only things that got official cancellations. Everything else is kind of still on the table. I think the Game of Thrones one also got officially canceled. Everything else is still on the table. So Taika could still make his movie in like 20 years, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon. Sean Levy, from what we've heard, that is going to be the next one. So we're going to get Mandalorian and Grogu, and then Sean Levy's is most likely going to start shooting this year, at the end of the year or beginning of next year. That's his next project. He's like all on board with it. Seems like it's the one furthest in. So that's why I said that could be the one where we get finally like a title or a synopsis. And if they really want to drop a bomb, bring Ryan Gosling out and announce that he's the lead, they could go into that movie. That's really the only one I see with like cast announcement, with plot or title announcement, because it does sound like it's pretty far along. All the other ones are still being written, and I think even Dawn of the Jedi, maybe if it had like a subtitle, they could come out and say it. Maybe they could bring James Mangold out for 5 minutes to say, yeah, we're still working on it. But I don't think you're going to really get any information about it, let alone any casting or any real start date. I think it's going to be something they might just remind you they're working on. But yeah, I do think we might get. I think we'll get Sean Levy talking about his Star Wars movie. I really do have a feeling we will. Just might. I don't know if we're gonna get like all the crazy announcements, but I think it would be really cool if they did bring him on stage, bring on Ryan Gosling,
Yeah,
and
Gosling. Oh, yeah.
and just be like, it's called Star Wars, whatever, and it's set during this time, and that's all we're going to tell you. And Ryan Gosling's the star. I think that would be cool. And I think that's as big of a bombshell announcement as you're going to get outside of like X characters cameoing in Mandalorian and Grogu, or this animated series is the next one. I think outside of that, if you're going for like true bombshell announcements, yeah, it's kind of underwhelming because we already know about it. But I do think that movie will be the thing they go with. But thanks so much for the super chat and for those questions. Scrolling back up, excuse me, we have Batasai who says, question, they're doing a new Harry Potter series. It's their right, but I don't think we need that or many remakes for that matter. I wonder, could it be possible that Disney allow via contract other studios to create Star Wars stories, like licensing the brand and legitimacy of those projects to integrate the canon with supervision of Lucasfilm and kind of how publishing creations of stories are done many types. I'm sure some kind of deal could be done, allowing different creatives productions, like the external studio puts the money and Disney collects a percentage of the profits, etc. Well, thanks for the questions. That's a really interesting question. It's one that I know we've never talked about on this show, and my short answer would be not anytime soon. I don't see Disney doing this whatsoever. I mean, they already do it for certain sides of Star Wars, right? You have Penguin Random House and Del Rey Worlds who publish Star Wars books. That's not a company owned by Disney, so it's licensed out to them. You have different companies licensing the Star Wars IP to do video games, but it's never been done in film or TV. So that's an interesting idea. Now, I think I could see them doing that with maybe an animated show. I mean, like, we were just talking about with a manga, it would kind of be licensed out if a manga studio took over and made their own manga, because Lucasfilm does have an animation department, but unless it was being done in-house at Lucasfilm, technically it would be licensed out if a manga studio was doing, or I mean, an anime studio was doing an anime. So it'll be interesting to see if that did happen. What's the future there? We know Lucasfilm has a prestigious and highly developed animation department, so I don't expect too many things to be licensed out. But if they wanted to give, we're seeing Young Jedi Adventures right now for little kids. We don't have an adult animation show yet, but if they wanted to do a variety of animation, right, and put it on a bunch of different platforms, put it on regularly scheduled TV, they could license out if they wanted to. I don't see it really ever happening for live action in television or film. The only way, and I think we shouldn't really hope for this, the only way you see it happen is if Star Wars just kind of dies. Like if nobody watches the movies, they put out 5 movies and nobody watches them, they put out a bunch of shows and nobody's watching them, they could look to sell Star Wars, and by doing that, they could start licensing it out to a bunch of studios to get their products made. Whichever one, falls in love with making Star Wars could end up taking it. Well, we're hearing that they're kind of doing that a little bit with the Muppets here. I know Warner Brothers says there's been a lot of rumors that they're selling Looney Tunes soon because they've been licensing it out to be produced. So it is possible. I just don't think it will happen anytime soon. And we really should not root for that because that means Star Wars will be absolutely dead. Like, I'm not just talking about they fail making movies that are good. I'm talking about Star Wars is like completely out of the pop culture zeitgeist. It's just a completely non-bankable franchise anymore. It is just something that is left in the past. And obviously, for people who love Star Wars, we shouldn't want that to happen because that means failure after failure after failure after failure, and that would not be a good thing. But you could see it in animation. I think that's the first place you could see it in terms of film and TV.
The thing that kind of holds me back against that more than anything is like the sharing and the percentage
Mhm.
that you're saying, like that Disney gets by letting someone else do it with supervision and all that. I mean, they kind of do that with gaming, right? So I get it with like different animation studios. That is something that anime properly becoming a part of the animation portfolio for Star Wars implies. That's okay. The idea of like other studios, like kind of doing like a Sony and Marvel partnership, no, no, no. Like it's already really sad that Marvel doesn't have full access to all of its characters, but that happened because they were like minutes away from being bankrupt, and all of these deals were just made to like every studio in Hollywood, right? Like Universal has some, Warner Brothers doesn't. They have the full DC slate for them, but it was a mess, right? Fox had all the X-Men, right? So yeah, it's a bit of a shame that like the MCU, as fun as it was in its prime, especially, it could have been even bigger with all these characters there from day one, right? So this idea that we, yeah, like another studio is creating this idea and then they might have rights or something to get popular. I do not like that. I do not like that at all. Like Liam said, that means everything has gone absolutely wrong. And Disney, as big of a studio as it is, as important as it is for the livelihood of theatrical, streaming, and everything else, they're also kind of bullies. Like the profit sharing for movie theaters, they're the studio that gets like the biggest cut from theaters, right? Like they don't like just give up stuff easily to other people. So I really doubt they'd want to have that happen, right? The Sony deal is just because they had Spider-Man, who is more valuable than everything in the MCU portfolio at that point. So yeah, yeah, I would not want to see that. I would love, more new creatives, more new platforms, mediums, everything for Star Wars. And if there are already like leaders in those fields and you have to work in hand with them, sure, but never like having to share the profit like that, like, oh, another studio is handling it. No, no, because then we start running into this whole issue of like, what if this is so good that it's better than the Star Wars that Disney's making, the main Star Wars, right? I'd rather take the goods and the bads with one studio. We did that with Lucas. Let's do that with Disney, especially with the amount of bank that they can put behind it. If you're splitting things off and then someone else gets successful and they might have more influence and pull and all that, then you're making a war over Star Wars just
Mhm.
because that's how money works. And I hate that idea.
Yeah, it would be. I mean, you. I think there's positives around the idea of sharing Star Wars. I think the big negative is lore and like keeping the world together and keeping it
Yeah.
cohesive because everybody's going to kind of want to do their own thing. So that's obviously the number one negative outside of just it would mean everything has sucked and not made any money and completely failed for the last 10 years, right? Outside of that, that would be the biggest problem. The other thing that would be refreshing, though, is if you don't care about lore, if you're just caring about cool projects, it would give a lot of different people a lot of different chances to do different things. So that is like the optimistic way of looking at it. But I think no matter what, it would be a disaster. And yeah, that would mean, I mean, for people who want Disney to sell Star Wars, right? Unless they got some unreal, ridiculous offer they couldn't refuse, because you have to take in so many different things. It's not just a big movie franchise for them or TV franchise for them. It is one of the centerpieces of their best part of their theme park. So that means if they sold Star Wars, they would have to pay licensing, which is why you're seeing The Simpsons leave Universal soon because they're paying Disney to use The Simpsons in their parks. So you have to pay licensing, and it would be kind of a crazy thing, if Star Wars disappeared from that. So you'd have to start paying licensing for Star Wars there. You'd have to get rid of one of your biggest money makers in the publishing side. And so there's a lot of facets to the business that would, be a disaster if they got rid of Star Wars. So really, I mean, if you want them to sell Star Wars, you kind of want Star Wars to be terrible for the next 10 plus years, 15, 20 years. Um, so yeah, it would not really work whatsoever. And I, you know, hope that never happens. But I do welcome it in an animation side or in any type of animated video game, novel project, or something like that that can be spun off into its own different direction, right? Like with live action, I think it all needs to be under one house. But thanks for the question. Something interesting to think about. Never thought about it before. A critical thinker says, besides Sword of the Jedi, what EU books would you have wanted to make Disney or wanted to make if Disney hadn't canceled or canned it? Um, well, there's a lot of. So you're asking for our ideas, right? Not necessarily which ones that were canceled would we want to see come back? Because I would have loved to see Imperial Commando continue. I think that would have been a cool one. But as for like things that specifically got canceled because of the Disney acquisition, that's a tough one. I think officially getting that full bridge from where Sword of the Jedi would have been to Legacy, I would have liked to see more stories continued in there. A lot of the things we've seen Dark Times do under Disney, I think we would have eventually seen done with EU. So you would have had more stories that took place between the like 18 to 5 BBY timeline, because most of our stories, like I was saying earlier in Dark Times in the EU, take place between 5 and 0 BBY, or like right after Revenge of the Sith for the next couple years. So I would have loved to see more stories continued there. And I think then with Old Republic too, you're continuing to flesh out that part of the timeline. That would have been something that I would have liked to see continued in publishing, and not necessarily just on the video game side. I would have loved to see publishing come back for Old Republic and fully tie it into Bane. Um, and then I guess, similarly with what we're seeing with Disney, with High Republic, that's an era that could have been really well handled if you would have tied it up. But yeah, I mean, out of all those, and I think the big one is Dawn of the Jedi, because Dawn of the Jedi has promise. When you read the comics, it's a
Yeah.
fun, different, interesting series, and I really like how unique it is. The book, it's kind of boring, but I would have loved to see them go fully into it. Like I've said in the past, one of my biggest problems with Dawn of the Jedi is it's not necessarily their fault, but it's the fact that it takes place so far ahead of even the Old Republic, like 23,000 years before most of what happens in the Old Republic, 20,000 years before what happens in most of the Old Republic, that it just feels like its own thing that's kind of in this weird space that doesn't really have much to it. And so I would have loved to see what their plans were for building it into the Old Republic, and how they slowly transformed it and turned it into the Star Wars we know. Because it does have some fun, interesting novel concepts, even if it what does feel like a very shallow part of the Star Wars universe because it was cut short.
Hmm. I mean, the one book that I mean, it's not really a book. It's ideas, and it's ideas that he never got to capitalize on, and it's primarily the idea that Zahn wanted to do some books kind of set after Legacy of the Force with the Skywalker family with Mara Jade and everything, and then it kind of got ripped away from him. I'd love to have seen like more leveled up, and especially at that point when he had become a little bit more of a prominent character, because he's really like a half generation separated from the solo kids in the EU. So it was awesome seeing him become a bigger character in Fate of the Jedi, but that's it. That's really all we get from him, right? So, if we had Mara alive still, I'm very curious how much that could have been like its own kind of trilogy, been really important for the characters, because like people forget just how much of the early EU is just randomly featuring all the solo kids. They had their junior Jedi Knights, the young Jedi Knights, and then they'd also have all the different trilogies and stuff in Bandamere. They would be on all these different adventures and have like sometimes chapters dedicated to them. You never really got that with Ben. You get some here and there, like smaller stories, but then really was Legacy that where he became a character officially in a lot of people's minds. So yeah, I'd love to have seen that. Man, what was that trilogy called? I'm blanking from New Jedi Ordered. What is it called?
Oh, Nightfall.
Nightfall. Yeah,
Yeah.
Nightfall. And I think the reason given was that, and it would have been it was like more so it was just getting a little too dark and depressing, and this was already getting too much. And there was like all the different authors kind of being shifted towards Star by Star being like this huge turning point. But I don't know, I mean, that's kinda what made a lot of the early New Jedi Order really fun for me, that it is so depressingly dark. It's not grim dark per se, but it's just like the levels to where the Vong are just this horrible, right? And I was gonna Danny Queek kinda just gets introduced, and then she's just there, and then she's gone again. She's just one of those characters I always like the way she's introduced. I was like, "Yeah, I think she's gonna have more," and then she did have a plan to have more, and then she's kinda not, right? And they try to fit her in here and there, but it's not really the same. Yeah, I would've liked seeing more and more happen, and things a little bit more touched in with more of the priestesses and everything, and then it never came out, obviously, and I don't think it necessarily was needed, but yeah, it was fine. And then the last thing I would say is just I just wish we had something that explained why Jaina kind of marries into this whole failed dynasty, and then like builds it out, and like the Imperial Knights, like what her role would have been. Like Sword of the Jedi would have been great for her next steps, But what is like the transition from that and Crucible into Star Wars Legacy, right? Like, what are we gonna see about Cole Skywalker and all the other Skywalkers leading from Luke Skywalker, Ben Skywalker into Cade, right? Like, I think they still have great stories to be told for sure, and the way Legacy would always framed it is almost like, yeah, everything was kind of fine, and then the Vong were kind of painted as villains again because the Vong forming but was infected by the one Sith, yada yada yada, right? That's all cool and all that, but it's like it was a remix. Legacy is always just kind of a remix of existing Star Wars stuff and then making new things out of it. It works great for comics. I don't know if how well it would have worked if we had books leading into it. They would have had their work cut out for them in a lot of ways. So I would have loved to see who would been up for the challenge for that. But yeah, it's still to this day, it really does confuse me just how much, as much as I love the Imperial Knights, and I thought the Fallen Empire was interesting. It's very interesting to me that someone descended from the Skywalkers is, the matriarch of the entire empire. That never truly sat right with me, and the fact that she doesn't seem to have any real influence into that story, even if it is separated by like 50, 60 years from where she would have been. I still think it's really important to know, like, why it can't just be because she loved Jagged. Like, why would the Imperial Knights have been formed if it was like why would she have stepped away from the Jedi? She's the sword of the Jedi. How do you go from that to she's just no longer in the story or has no influence, but seemingly has maybe been connected to the Imperial Knights? A lot of questions with Legacy that I would have loved to have been dug into because Legacy does so many big swings out of mashing everything together from all the different Star Wars at that point that you're like, oh man, okay, what's next? Like, why? Why are we here?
Yeah, and Critical Thinker says I would have really wanted to see Stackpole write a Horn family book to finally give Valen
Yeah.
and Gisela stuff to do. Plus, you could do a Zahn Skywalker family road trip Legacy of the Force. Yeah, those are all good ideas as well. And there's so many things like, I mean, obviously they could have done. We don't know exactly the direction they would have taken it when it got canceled because so many things were already in production when the EU got shut down that it was
Mhm.
like, it was in a way they were able to kind of pull back on some things that would leave even more story threads bare. So been interesting to see if they were, did sort of the Jedi and they left all these implications out there and then never answered them. Um, I think I think it would have been interesting to see how they'd handled that later in the future. Probably why it never came out. But yeah, those are all good choices. Good question. Thank you so much for sending that in. Critical Thinker also says, what if the sequel trilogy adapted Legacy of the Force directly? Say they kept Chewie alive and recapped the biggest events of the Long War in flashbacks. Do you think audiences would have accepted it? I would say, first off, if you have any type of interesting storytelling or compelling storytelling, audiences will accept it, even if they're not necessarily clued in on everything that's happening. That
Yeah.
being said, Legacy of the Force, I don't think is the place to start that. If you were directly adapting the EU, I do think the Vong War would have been the place to start it. If you wanted to mess with the timeline, you could just push it back even further. But I do think, I mean, they're the main characters are too old to play those versions of Luke, Han, and Leia. But we had so many, continuity issues with with Legends. I think we would have been okay with seeing something like the Long War as long as we got to see Han, Leia, and Luke back on the big screen. I mean, even in hindsight, wouldn't necessarily have worked because if you did something as big or epic as as a New Jedi Order, Carrie Fisher passed away in 2016. So if you're still in the same timeline, you would have lost
Yeah.
Leia 1 to 2 movies in. I mean, honestly, they were blessed that Last Jedi, all her scenes were good enough to the fact that they didn't have to do any reshoots because the movie came out over a year after she passed away. So people forget that. But anyway, you would have had aging Harrison Ford. Like I know what you mean by Legacy of the Force because timeline it would have been a little closer to the actor's age, but I just think there's too many implications. There's too many things around the Solo kids, the Skywalker kids. I mean, now all of a sudden you'd have Luke who has a wife and a child, and you've never seen it before, and like or yeah, because in Legacy he would have already had Ben. So I just think there's so many things going on, and also part of Jason's fall, even if it doesn't work for you or if it doesn't work completely, part of the weight of it, part of the decision of making him fall is the fact that you've spent so much time with him. So if he just is evil right off the bat, I mean, it would be the same way as we've seen Kylo Ren, right? You don't ever get to see him as the good guy. So it's harder to fully empathize with his return because you don't know him as the Jason that was, right? And it's one of the inherent flaws with kind of doing the Kylo Ren story is that same point, right? And the reason it worked with Vader a little bit was Vader was more shrouded in mystery, and you had Luke as the center point pulling him in. Here, with if it was reversed, with Kylo Ren, it's a little more difficult to make that work. So I think the Legacy of the Force would have been the wrong place to adapt it. So I don't think the audiences necessarily would have gotten on board because I do think there is a point to where you can be too confused by all the things you've missed. But if they would have done it well, if their adaptation would have been great, I think people would have watched it even if they were a little confused at first.
It would have been possible if we started in like more like 2019, where we have a more of an expectation in my mind of movies that have supporting TV shows that can be characters kind of crisscrossing over, and then you'd have like, oh, okay, like all the X-wing Stackpole kind of stuff that goes to a TV show and has some cameos and big battles in in the movies, and the movies focus more on the Jedi stuff and the Vong and all that. Yeah, I think that's possible. I again, like Liam said, Legacy of the Force is not the right place. Legacy of the Force is also very much like a post 9/11 story, and so much of the prequels is a post 9/11 story with episode 2 onwards that I feel like there'd be a lot of rehashed themes too. And it's just not something and as much as I don't love how much JJ made the emphasis on like no politics in Star Wars, he unironically did set it up for a lot of stuff that we are seeing in the world today, right? That doesn't mean that the concurrent films, both Rise of Skywalker and The Last Jedi, actually built off of that, but there is a chance for other extended media to flesh it out, to make it different, to recontextualize. If we'd done Legacy of the Force almost as it is with all its themes, as its general storylines, it'd be like a darker prequels to me, and I don't know if I'd love that. And I don't know how you'd even explain to people, like, the whole idea of, like, the Corellians kinda, like, starting off the whole thing. It's such a niche thing that only EU fans would get, right? There's just so much niches to Legacy of the Force, and again, New Jedi Order, it's a massive undertaking. It's huge, but it's also absolutely necessary. And as much as you might not love Kylo as a character, I think what works for so many people, besides the familial connection, is that he's so broken and he's almost chaotic to a degree. Jason was never really that chaotic. He was messed up, but he had a weight of an entire war. He had so many things go wrong. And frankly, he's also just weird. Just like he's really weird, right? And especially like once we see him in Dark Nest, after everything that happens in later New Jedi Order and then leading into Legacy, it doesn't work seamlessly, but at least you can kind of get it. I don't know how you would. There's like even more layers that you have to like destroy and discard for his character to get to that Cadus version. Not necessarily Kylo. Kylo is like fractured by knowing at the same time as the galaxy that his father and his mother and his uncle didn't tell him about his grandfather's true past, right? And stuff like that. So and you could say you could replace Corellians with the First Order, then I'm like, "Okay, I guess," but then aren't we running into the same issue here that a lot of people have with the sequels? Like, it just feels like a rehash of Empire versus Rebellion. Alright, I guess you could say, like, "Oh, it's the First Order actually being the invading force, and the New Republic is fighting off, and, like, they would be prepared, they'd have the good guys, like, be in a strong place," and I agree, I think that's something I wish the sequels had actually leaned into more. But it's also not realistic timeline-wise with how much happens in the EU and how devastated the galaxy is. Like, if we truly did adapt New Jedi Order, started with Legacy of the Force as the movies, I think the movies would make a way more emphasis on, like, "Hey, the galaxy is destroyed, guys." Like, it didn't rebuild itself in 5 years. We didn't have Vong farming be reworked to rebuild planets until much later into the actual Legacy Comics prologue. So Yeah, it's not something I think would happen. No, and I mean, frankly, the EU is never really designed for movies to fit in or to be adapted. They thought this was it. This is how Star Wars is gonna continue into the future, and then it became bigger and bigger and sprawling more and more, and it's like, great. But at the end of the day, if George Lucas was in charge, he himself had always said, "This is their Star Wars. I can give them guidance, I can push them certain directions, but once I make my Star Wars, that's the Star Wars." Right? So, if we had Lucas in charge too, oh boy, he would have just gone, "No way, like, I'm not doing that." It would have been totally different. It would have been totally different than what Disney made with the sequels. It would definitely have been way different, and he would have made everyone mad again, and he knew that. He didn't need that burden as especially after the prequels, so, yeah, I get it, critical thinker. I know you got a lot of love for the EU and all that, and you have definitely pointed out some criticisms about Jaina's character arc and how incomplete it is and kinda her legacy for sure, but yeah, films would not work, especially with Legacy of the Force at the starting point.
I think they could work. They just have to be more than a trilogy. You'd have to make a long series. And I mean, obviously we're talking in a vacuum. We're talking about hypotheticals and what ifs, but all these, really are just shot down by the realism of the world, right? Like it was too late to make Star Wars
Yeah,
sequels surrounding Luke, Leia, and Han unless you were going to do a new story because New Jedi Order, they're far younger than they are in the Star Wars sequels.
yeah.
So let or not far younger, but by character, but by real life, they're far younger.
Yeah.
By character, they're only like 5, 6 years younger. Um, but in real life, you got a 70-year-old Mark Hamill, you got a nearly 60-year-old Carrie Fisher, you've got an mid 70s when they started Harrison Ford, who they barely got to do one Star Wars movie, let
Yeah.
alone like seven. So just the logistics of the world, they were never going to be able to adapt the EU. So their options were either make a new story that fit into the EU that kind of surrounded these characters and try to bring in the EU characters, recast, or do something completely different. And they went with completely different. But yeah, a lot of the logistics around, even in hindsight, I mean, it makes it even more obvious why they couldn't have just adapted the EU because you lost Carrie Fisher. So, I mean, obviously losing Leia would have been massive, even worse to the story
Oh
of
boy, yeah.
adapting New Jedi Order, Legacy of the Force, or Fate of the Jedi, or whatever story you picked. It would have been worse than what we got because it would have she's essential to those stories, whereas she's not as essential to the sequels, even where we were at the point where we lost her. So yeah, there's so many things that I wish they could have done. There's so many things that would have been really cool, but to truly adapt the EU they would have had to start
In the
in
90s.
the yeah, well, yeah, in the 90s. But if you want to start with New Jedi Order, you would have basically had to start mid 2000s and then just let them run for 10, 15 years.
And Harrison Ford
and
would love that.
oh yeah, he would have signed up instantly. He
Oh,
loves
yeah. 10
that's
10 movies, like, that's more than an MCU actor's contract in the early days, like, that's crazy
yeah,
to think about.
and get Martin Scorsese to direct them all.
Oh,
Um,
yeah, of course.
yeah, no, I mean, I love speculating about it too, and that's one of the reasons why I said like if we want a fully realized EU on film, you need to recast and you need to do it in a different universe, and that I think that would be such a cool side project. I don't More people need to get on that train. It would be such a cool side project to do. You could still have both your cake and eat it too. You could have it in every way. You could have everything you wanted in both sides of Star Wars if they did that. But uh, yeah, it really is. It is we were boxed into a corner basically by deciding to start making the sequels in 2013, and then they kind of only did the thing they could do. Now they could have made way better movies. There's no debate
Yeah,
around that,
yeah.
but they story wise when it comes to adapting the EU, there wasn't too much they could have done. That's why I've never really hated the idea of what they did with the EU. I just wish they continued writing the EU or continued making the EU in some form, didn't just kill it. But I don't mind that they made the sequel movies in a different timeline. I just wish they didn't kill. the timeline that we were all invested in and just say we're never making another story in it again. That's the thing that's rubbed me the wrong way. But yeah, let's get back to the chat because we went on that one for a while. Badasai says, how much Andor will connect Mothma's speech with what we see in Rebels Secret Cargo? A speech at the beginning is shown, and she is dressed in the white, not in the blue, like a trailer, if that is the same speech. So it's going to tie in. We're already pretty certain it's going to tie in. And I think truly the way I feel about the shows, the way they're going to structure it is kind of the build to the Gorman Massacre. Because from seeing Rebels, we know that is like the official point. That's the like, we're the Rebel Alliance, and here we are. We're officially fighting back. And with the way Andor structured for season 2, I think it's going to be the build, the darkness, the build, the horror to the kind of hope that you're going to see in the future. And when you get to that hope point, that's when you're going to get K2SO. You're going to get some of the more lighthearted characters. You're going to get some of the more interesting, fun things that you saw in the first trailer. Maybe that vibe comes in a bit more because you're closer to A New Hope. You're closer to Rogue One. But initially, I think you are going to be completely surrounded by the despair that leads into that moment. So I do think there's going to be some connection. I can't say that the one we see in the trailer is the exact same one you see in Rebels, but there is going to be a lot of connection between that moment and everything you see build up from Mon Mothma before that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good question. I don't know. I don't know exactly how I want them to handle Gorman Massacre even now. Kind of changes every day for me, honestly. I don't mind it just being one event where she's leading and hinting to it and she's making appearances. I don't mind if, for what we've been kind of speculating and seeing, is that, oh, like Cassian's going to be there. Mon Mothma might herself be there. That'll be like a breaking point. Like, I don't know. I'm kind of open to it all. I wouldn't be surprised at this point if Saw Gerrera is involved too, because he's become such a more bigger player, and he's everything that we've seen so far in like Bad Batch and Rebels is that he kind of throws things into chaos when he wants to. So I wouldn't be surprised if like it's not entirely on the Empire. It's mostly on them, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was planting seeds for everything to go wrong because he's like, I need to force the hand him on Moth, especially after what we've seen in Mask of Fear. Great book. Go check it out. Check out a review. I wouldn't be surprised if, like, over time, that partnership between him and Bale and then Luthen, he's like, no, I'm getting tired of y'all. And my storyline is to force you guys to actually take proper revolutionary action instead of just waiting around and doing stuff in your, typical fashion, right? So, and that really does determine how the Gorman Massacre is handled. If it's like that with Saw Gerrera, you don't have to even talk about it as Gorman Massacre. You can have that be like a side mission that he's doing with other things, and then you see like, oh my God, he's created this web. They walked right into it. It all collapses in the final two, right? Or it could just be like fully Mon Mothma tied to Rebels, closing it off at the ship when they dock. Like, there's so many ways to handle it. So many ways to handle it, and it makes me excited. It makes me a little terrified, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we will see. I think it's going to connect very nicely, but we shall see what they end up doing. Critical Thinker says, what prequel era books would you recommend I read before Plagueis? I know it can be read as a standalone, but I want to get all the references. Well, I recommend you read every Star Wars book that came out before Plagueis came out. I mean, I say that jokingly, but Lucino writes that book with like reference to so many
Everything.
things. So I wouldn't, you don't have to read everything, but you will get a lot more if you have read what he's setting up and what he's referencing to. Now, I think the important things, and like you said, you don't have to have read anything. I think just a semi familiarity or a fairly strong familiarity with the EU and the way it operates and functions is enough to enjoy Plagueis. Like I know I've said in the past that it is like one of those books that is not strictly for beginners, and I still stand by that, but it's something that you don't have to be an encyclopedia on the EU to enjoy it a lot, to love it. You'll just get one or two more extra things. But I would say more so than even prequel stuff, I would recommend really diving into the Old Republic because he references a lot of Sith, a lot of stuff from the Old Republic. Just even do like Wikipedia article reads on a lot of the Bainite Sith because you won't find stories about them. So read some stuff about the Bainite Sith. And I guess maybe you don't want to do that because some of it is created in the Plagueis book and he just talks about it. Like, like there's a lot of stuff. A lot of the references are to the Old Republic and the lineage of Bane. So I would say if you want the best experience, read Bane, all 3 books. Maybe read about KOTOR if you haven't played it. Play KOTOR, KOTOR 2. A little bit of maybe the Old Republic books, but they were coming out right around the same time as Plagueis, so you don't necessarily need to know about the MMORPG Sith. They're not as well referenced, but Revan, Malgus, Treya, Nihilus, Scion, all of them are referenced. All the stuff from Bane is referenced many times. So I think some stuff from Tales of the Jedi, like Exar Kun, stuff like that, is referenced. I'm trying to think what else, but yeah, I mean, I know Turkish said you could read some of the Maul books, and Maul Lockdown came out after Plagueis, so you don't necessarily need to have read that. But Shadowhunter, Plagueis surprisingly connects very well with Phantom Menace. I don't want to spoil too much, but it builds into Phantom Menace, so there is a good amount of Maul content in the book. So if you want all the Maul stuff as well, Shadowhunter, you can definitely check out. Although Shadowhunter would hypothetically take place during the Plagueis book at some point because Plagueis spans so much time. So, yeah, those would be the things I'd recommend. But I think my biggest recommendation would be to finish Bane.
Yeah, I can't add anything more than that. It's pretty freaking comprehensive. That's the guy with the bookshelf.
Yeah, Plagueis is my favorite book. So, any advice you need on it, definitely happy to give it to you. Have you read Philip Kennedy Johnson's War World Saga? If so, what did you think? I've not read it. I need to catch up on a lot of the newer DC. I was hardcore reading single DC issues with Rebirth, and then I kind of fell off. I was only keeping up with Batman, and then during post COVID, I've really fallen off of new stuff. So I've not read it, but what did you think of it? Is it something I should read? What like even on that vein, critical thinker, if you are reading new stuff for DC, let me know some of your favorites because I would like to get back into it. I just have so much old stuff that I still have that I bought in 2020 and stuff, and I haven't read. But I would like to read some of the newer lines because I've completely fallen out of what they're doing currently in comics. And then just to answer, a critical thinker said I've been listening to Bane trilogy audiobooks right now, so that works out. Yeah, perfect. Just finish those. Again, you don't really have to do anything, but finish those and know a little bit about Revan and Nihilus and all those characters. I think that's good. Turkish says there. Oh, I already read that. Turkish said I read the Plagueis book first though, and wasn't really a problem. Yeah, it isn't a problem to read Plagueis without knowing much. I think you just need to know Palpatine. You need to know the prequels. You need to know a little bit of rough EU history. Amateur Bookish Hour says, do you know when you're going to upload the 6th part of the complete Legends timeline? Yes, I know that, and I can guarantee you it will be within the next week because I am currently working on it. I got to work on it a little bit today. Those are massive undertakings, as you guys know. I said every video, but they take forever, and they are long videos, and it requires hundreds and hundreds of graphics for me to make. And we got busy with a lot of stuff towards the end of the year, and I got behind on it. But I know a lot of people really do like those. They have grown over time in viewership, which is what I was hoping for. So I am currently working on part 6. It will be, my goal is to finish it for Friday. If I can't finish it for Friday, because we always release a video every Friday, and we're starting to, since I got back from my trip and things are starting to settle down a little bit here. We're going to try to start getting you guys at least 2 videos out a week, but for sure Fridays, every Friday we'll have a video. I'm trying to get it out for Friday, but I have a few more things I have to finish with graphics, and depending on the rest of my workload this week, I can't guarantee it, but it will be out by next week at some point. So there you go. hopefully you're gonna enjoy that when it drops. And it will be actually, because there's so much content. I was originally doing the entire Rebellion era. I said it was going to be an 8-part series. I think it's going to be a 9-part series now, and there's going to be 2 Rebellion era episodes. This will be everything up to The Empire Strikes Back, and the next one will be through The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Rob Godek says, any chance your channel can do more reading order videos with every comic or novel, Darth Vader, Han Solo, Boba Fett, etc. would be great additions to the Thrawn and Mara Jade videos y'all did. Well, that series again, I actually do really want to get back to that. That's something that again I did, and they didn't get that many views, and they've slowly grown over time. I know the Mara one did fairly well. So I would like to get back to that. I think my next one I had started outlining was I had outlined a Maul, I had outlined a Qui-Gon Jinn, and I had outlined a Corran Horn. So those were the 3 I was working on, but all of those would be great. Darth Vader would be forever. That would be like a well, that would have to be 2 videos. You have to do a canon one, you have to do a Legends one, because it would be too much. It'd be like an hour and a half worth of content probably to fit in one video. But both would be probably 40-minute episodes, 45-minute episodes. Same with Han, but Han would, I think, would be a little more streamlined than Vader, because you have Anakin and Vader. So yeah, those would be long ones, but definitely want to get back to that series as well. All right. Yeah, we are running out of time. So again, if you want to make sure you get any last questions on tonight's stream, send in a super chat, helps out the channel, and we will get to your question first. If not, we're going to keep running through these for the next few minutes and then wrap up the stream tonight. Turkish says Ben Mendelsohn is like a more subtle Christoph Waltz. You know, I forgot about Christoph Waltz because he hasn't been in that much lately. I'd love to see him in Star Wars. Just, you know, you saying that, but yeah, they're fairly similar in the fact that they play good. They're good character actors for villains for sure.
I think Waltz has at least a bit more of a reputation of playing some pretty good guys. I don't know if Mendelsohn really is just Marvel. I feel like a lot of his other roles have just been villains or like very gray, very, very gray. I think Waltz like beautifully crafted psychotic villains or, you know, a couple good guys here and there. But you're gonna get him in All Your Murders in the Building season 5, and you're gonna like it
Oh,
because he's not gonna be in Star Wars anytime soon because I don't know if they have him scheduled up, and he's a busy actor. You know, they need to put a movie worth his reputation, right? Like, and I don't know if he would be like a leading actor in a Star Wars film. He'd be a great villain or a great supporting actor, but I don't know if I'd be like, here's how I would market the Star Wars film. This guy, right? So it's a little tougher, but like if it's a TV show, right? He could do something, you know, very similar to Skarsgård, where he could lead that. Then the question is like, okay, how do you differentiate from the Andor level writing that Skarsgård had? It's his very complicated gray character. How do you make Walls get to have like all the best qualities of his filmmaking pedigree and in Star Wars? And that's a hard one because he's a very theatrical actor in my mind. Like it feels like someone who has to be in a movie, and that's that's all up in the air right now.
I think he could make a cool. I wouldn't put him as a Jedi or a Sith, but I think he could make like a fun, interesting kind of Talon Card-esque character, like a
Mm,
smuggler, a swindler, somebody who runs his kind of own empire, has this charisma, well respected. Like that would be really cool. I think he could do a great job with that. But yeah, one of the biggest wastes of Christoph Waltz recently was what they did with him in James Bond. That was very underwhelming. I was hoping for more with Blofeld
yeah.
because it's such an iconic villain. But yeah, I mean, you'll never get better than Inglorious Bastards for him. So I'd love to see him bring Colonel Hans Landa to Star Wars. It could be a cool Imperial, but then you always do run into that kind of thing we've talked about in the past with like Moff Gideon and Giancarlo Esposito of like just literally bringing Gustavo Fring to
Yeah.
Star Wars. How do you make them different and not just bring their most popular character and re-put it into a Star Wars version? But I think he's versatile enough, obviously, to do that. Critical Thinker says, who are your favorite comic book writers? Off the top of my head, I'd have to say Alan Moore, Grant Morrison, Jeff Johns, Scott Snyder, and Peter J. Tomasi. Tomasi's a good shout because he's great and not talked about enough. He's gotten a little more love over the years because he did Batman and then he did Superman. And I'm not sure what he's been doing recently, but he is a good author. The other four are like Mount Rushmore authors. Maybe Snyder's not quite on there, but what Jeff Johns did for all the crap he's gotten over the years with, the DCEU and the way he, handled a lot of those things and some of that, the guy was the architect of everything from the late 90s or like into the 90s, early 2000s through the mid 2010s. The guy was DC. So he's an incredible author, and his Green Lantern run is one of my favorites. So I'm glad you put John's on there. I do think the two that most people say are the goats are Alan Moore and Grant Morrison. I would lean more Alan Moore. I just never read anything from him that I haven't loved. It's one of the best Superman books of all time, one of the best Batman books of all time. Watchmen, V for Vendetta, Miracle Man is excellent. Swamp Thing is maybe my favorite. I think I've said it before on here, but I think Swamp Thing is my favorite comic book series of all time. Not necessarily my favorite like story of all time. Like I still go with a lot of Batman stuff, Dark Knight Returns, Killing Joke, which is also Alan Moore. But Swamp Thing is my favorite series. So I love that. I would throw Frank Miller in there. I know he hasn't been necessarily great in the last 15 years, but stuff he did with Daredevil and the stuff he did with Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns, the stuff he did on like even his original books, Sin City is great, 300 is great. So he is an icon and a legend. I gotta throw Stan on there, Stan Lee. Even if Silver Age is a little hard to read nowadays, it's really wordy. The guy created or co-created so many icons, and his stories, when he really gets in a groove, like, yeah, if you start reading the omnibus for Fantastic Four or Spider-Man or Iron Man or whatever, might take you a few issues to really get into it, but some of the best Spider-Man stories still are from Stan Lee, and that's when he got into a groove with the character, he could knock it out of the park. So I loved a lot of what he did with Spider-Man. I love a lot of what he did with Fantastic Four. So I would have to throw him in there. I think I would throw in Mark Waid just as another one who's maybe not in the top, but Mark Waid in that top 10-ish for me because he did a great Flash run. He did a great Justice League run, underrated Justice League run. He's done some great Superman stories over the years, done a few great Batman stories, did some good Wonder Woman stuff. So throw him on there. And then I think I also got to throw on like John Byrne and Chris Claremont. Their X-Men stuff, amazing. What John Byrne did with Fantastic Four as well, and Spider-Man, also great. And last one, because I don't want to go too long on this, but one of the last ones that's coming up to my mind right off the top, obviously Morrison is great as well. I didn't talk about him much, but he would be in my top 3 or so. One of the other ones I want to throw a shout out to is Jeff Loeb. Jeff Loeb got some criticism for some of the stuff he did with TV and necessarily have as much success moving over to TV. There's still some people who really hate Batman Hush because it is a lot more simple of a story. It's not as amazing as his reputation, but the art is incredible and the story's great. But I purely picked Jeff Loeb because of his Colors series for Marvel and what he did with Long Halloween, Dark Victory. I just love those stories. So I love Spider-Man Blue. It's one of my favorite Spider-Man comics ever. And then you have Long Halloween, which is to me a top 3-4 Batman story ever. And Dark Victory is probably top 10-ish, top 12-ish. So yeah, great author there as well. And I'm sure I'm missing a bunch of other ones that I love. I'm trying to like look around at all my bookshelves and trying to remember who else I haven't mentioned, but those are all great ones.
Can't really add much there.
And then Critical Thinker says DC Rex recently, Absolute Batman, Absolute Wonder Woman, Williamson's Arrow, Adam's Flash, Adam's Green Lantern, current cast book, Ram the New Gods, Williamson, Batman and Robin. Okay, so Batman and Robin's good. Okay, definitely got some stuff to check out now. And then said, yeah, Frank Miller's old stuff was legendary. Some of his new stuff isn't as good, but when the man locks in, he's fantastic. Daredevil, Dark Knight Returns, 300. Yeah, absolutely. And even Frank Miller is one of those guys, just like some of our great auteurs in film, that even if he's given us some of the greatest stuff ever, he's also given us some of the best so bad it's good stuff ever. So you got that there with Frank Miller, multifaceted. And then Critical Thinker also says, really got to get around to reading Wade's Flash at some point, given how fundamental or how foundational it is for Wally West and the Flash mythos in general. Loeb and Sale were a master creative team. Yep. So definitely check out Wade's Flash. It is great. It's I can't say, it's hard to pick between Wade and John's Flash, but they're both excellent. And Grant Morrison had a short little run on Flash that was also really good. That was I can't remember if it preceded or was after Wade's, but it was also very good. Anyway, so we're running out of time. I think we'll take one more question here and then wrap up tonight's show. Turkish asked this one earlier and I referenced it, but we never answered it. Are you guys going to talk about the one article that claims there is interest for a second season of The Acolyte? I looked it up while we were talking earlier and I could not find this article. The only thing I could find was that some people were theorizing that some of the analytics could maybe say that they should renew Acolyte, but I didn't get to read it because we were on stream. So maybe you can clarify what you mean by that down below. But I have not heard anything about them bringing back Acolyte in any form outside of possibly a sequel series, but that's mostly speculation. Where else are
Yeah, I
we?
mean, I think the one thing I know about it is that it's pair analytics, which it's not terrible, but it the way their system works, from my understanding, is that they actually more aggregate demand as opposed to viewership. So there was definitely a lot of demand for Acolyte, and some of that demand was definitely negative. And yes, it was the second most viewed Disney Plus series last year, but that's not great because the viewership numbers weren't good overall for Disney Plus last year. So I mean, look, I would love, in my mind, a much more experienced team, a different showrunner, with Leslie just kind of being as like a like almost like how George Lucas was on Return of the Jedi, like coming in where needed to like make sure her story comes through, but her execution was not there. We were both very excited with her having a proper story group, right, and a bunch of writers involved. Definitely from Star Wars fans and diehards like her to like people who've never been with Star Wars to be able to give that fresh perspective to challenge these writers. It didn't work out. Um, Now, if you gave it closer to an Andor budget, you made longer episodes, maybe the story does work a lot better. Even if you don't love it, I think it makes a lot more sense. But right now, as it stands, I don't know. Like I get people are showing like the positive signs towards it, and I'll always appreciate Star Wars fans finding a positive in something. I mean, come on, that's kind of like the name of the game since '83. But if they're gonna do Acolyte, they gotta almost like rebuild it out with animation, with other books and stories, recontextualize it, and then just frankly just lead into a Palpatine story. Like if they're gonna do a season 2, and if it comes back, it should be leading into like not a Palpatine, sorry, a Plagueis film. Just straight up like, okay, where if you don't watch it, great, you could just have to focus on Plagueis. And that's his whole story. That's his trilogy there in movies. If you do watch it, okay, they're like a secondary plot line that he maybe handles in like the first movie before moving on to a lot more stuff that's further down the timeline that includes Palpatine that gets closer to the prequels, right? That's how I would look at it. So you could still blend it, appreciate both, but then make them definitely separate entities.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. And I think, I mean, I wouldn't hate. I know Acolyte fans won't be happy with this, but I wouldn't hate if you had like an Infinity War style opening with like a Plagueis, and he's just like tearing up the Acolyte cast, and he's like, "You think you can be a Sith, when I'm the Sith?" And that would be like a crazy opening to just show his power, to show the transition, the darkness, all that. Yeah, it wouldn't really be an Acolyte sequel then, but it would be a cool transition and a way for you to like patch up some of those things that some people find as holes with the like having Osha and May and Kamir all a lot live and around and practicing the dark side, with Plagueis just kind of there watching and doing nothing. So I don't know. They could do something like that. I doubt they would ever do that, but they could. And that's going to probably wrap it up tonight for our stream. I did remember one other name I wanted to throw out there for favorite author as well, because I was looking at my shelf. Brian K. Vaughan has got to get a shout out for Saga, Why the Last Man, two of my favorite non-superhero books that have ever been written in the comic form. And I'm sure there's a bunch more that I'm forgetting, like Jonathan Hickman and Ed Brubaker and all those guys. But thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. It was fun discussing these topics with you guys and discussing all this stuff in the chat. Make sure you comment below if you haven't joined us for next week's stream, where you can send in your chats. Again, we take your guys' chats and answer everybody throughout the stream every night. So make sure you join us for next week's stream and bring all the things that you might have wanted to ask tonight and didn't get a chance to. Make sure you like the video if you haven't. Subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Stay tuned for videos every single week. Again, every week we will have a video out on Fridays. We'll have some other videos out as they come throughout the week. This week, we did have an Andor reaction yesterday. If you haven't checked that out, you can check out our Andor reaction video that was up. Shorts come out every other day, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then community poll. We do have polls going on there right now. And every year in March, I like to do this. So I just restarted it again. We have the bracket going, or tournament going, for favorite Star Wars movie and show. We have a couple new ones to add, obviously, to this year's tournament. So that's going on over there. So those will be coming out in the afternoon. Morning will still be the characters. So if you're interested in the brackets, then you guys can enjoy that over there as well. Thank you so much for watching tonight's stream, everybody. And we will see you all next week for more news and questions from you guys. Good night, everyone.